what is self-care? What isn't self-care? What doesn't count? All these things that
Yeah.
it can be kind of upsetting to me to see kind of the arguments that I'm seeing about just the people's responses to like, well, that's not self-care. Basic going to the doctor and getting screened for things. That's not self-care.
Yeah.
You need to be doing more than that. Or somebody saying, right now, my self care is taking a shower, and people being like, well, that's not self care. You need to be doing more. And for me, I'm like, what exactly are we talking about here? Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Welcome to Worthy Mother Podcast. This episode today is going to be a little bit different than what we typically do with guest episodes. Today, we're kind of structuring this as more of a discussion, and we are going to be discussing self-care. There have been a lot of conversations in the online space about what counts as self-care, what it means to care for ourselves. What is enough self-care? Who gets to decide what self-care is? Are we overly relying on self-care to fix all our problems? A lot of things like that I have been seeing. And I'm really interested in just like kind of breaking down my own thoughts on this and getting to a point where I understand why these conversations are happening and how that impacts, I guess, like how I feel about self-care. Because obviously,
Mm.
with this podcast, I believe that as mothers, we need to be prioritizing ourselves. We need to be making our own care, the meeting of our own needs a priority. It's crucial. And when we're not doing that, there's consequences to that. But it also doesn't answer everything, right? There's societal factors to our experiences. We don't have control over everything. So yeah, that's kind of my intro into what this episode is going to be about. And joining me, I'm very excited about this, Amanda Della Madriz. She is a past guest. She was on the podcast last year, and we had an incredible conversation about self-criticism, mom guilt, just kind of some of the mindset behind mom guilt. And she is back. She is somebody who is also really passionate about helping moms learn to care for themselves and understand the importance of that. And so we're going to just like dig into this. So, Amanda, welcome back to the podcast. Can you just kind of give us an overview of who you are, what you stand for, all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to be back. I absolutely love chatting with you. My name is Amanda. I am a life and mindset coach for moms. And my focus is helping moms connect better to themselves. So, self connection through working through mom guilt and self care and overwhelm and burnout and all of the things that make it hard to show up the way that we want to in motherhood. But it all leads back to what I call self connection. So, that's my passion. And I work with clients one on one via Zoom. So, it makes it easy to help people everywhere versus just locally. And I absolutely love what I do.
I love it. And when we were talking about doing this episode, you had said self-connection kind of as a way to kind of understand parts of self-care. And I was like, yes, it makes so much sense. So I really want to get into that in this episode. But before we do, I want to just ask you, what conversations are you seeing around self-care that have been interesting to you?
I think that what I have seen a lot lately has been not anger, but that sort of moms or women in general, sort of like raising the banner and being like, enough, we need to do this. And sort of that pendulum swinging towards aggression and wanting to sort of stop and take the extreme and being like, we're done with this. We have to take care of ourselves, at least within social media, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's the loudest voice that you're probably hearing right now, which I find interesting because I think it's sort of this idea of like it's coming from a place of enough
Mm-hmm.
and it's angry, but anger in general, like I don't know if it's really helping solve the issue that we're having with self care across all the experiences of motherhood overall in our society. I don't know if it's helping or not, to be honest.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like the kind of passion behind it. It's important to like care about it, but how that comes out and what the impact of that is. Like, is it really helping us to feel so passionate in that way that is almost like
Right.
aggressive?
It is. It does feel very aggressive and very aggressive. Like, at least in my experience, what I've seen is like women towards their husbands and even talking about the
Hmm.
mental load, like with resentment and anger, which I get. That's what they're feeling. So, of course, I'm all for like expressing what you're
Yeah.
feeling. but I'm just kind of wondering if like it's hard to sustain that level of energy and be productive. And so I kind of wonder, my path has always been like, let's bring it down to balance and give you space to feel everything. But trying to make changes from this place of passionate aggression feels like a little bit much for me.
Yeah, I totally get that. It makes me wonder. So something that I've been seeing and that I don't disagree with, but I think there's more to the story, is this conversation about like toxic self-care and the way we talk about self-care as kind of this like end all be all. If you just take care of yourself, motherhood will be easier, and how there's a
Right.
lot of systematic factors in place that we actually don't have control over. And so acting like if you just make the time for yourself, well, some moms, they don't even have the support to make the time, right? Like if we're having
Mhm.
conversations that kind of block out all the other factors, it can be toxic, right? Which I
Right.
completely agree with. But I don't think that for me stops self-care as being important, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, and I truly believe this, if we're not having our needs met, if we're running on empty in these different areas of our life, then we're not going to be able to show up in the way that we want, in a way
For
that's
sure.
conducive to, maybe good relationships with our kids, our partners, the people in our life, whatever it is. And there has to be then some layer of compassion for that if the reasons you're unable to show up for yourself are out of your control or things that you're working on, right? But it's
Right.
interesting when you're saying the anger towards the different pieces in somebody's life and how it may not be the most helpful to feel like, yes, to feel angry is fine because we,
Right.
validate all the feelings, but that may not be the way to move forward.
Yeah.
And it does kind of get into that for me of like, what is in our control versus what's not. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's really interesting because even though I was just saying how I'm not really sure that that approach of aggression is going to be helpful long term, I actually think
Hmm.
that when you think about societal issues that are out of our control in our individual lives as mothers versus what we can control, like I think the people out there screaming and making noise are the ones that are actually going to help make those societal shifts.
Hmm.
And that could be productive on that scale, right? So I'm not saying there isn't a purpose to it. I just think that it's such a complicated and
It
layered
is.
issue that there isn't one solve, there isn't one way to do it. Like I do think when you think about what's in your control, that self-compassion piece is really key, isn't it? Right? Because you have to understand what is possible for you in your individual life versus what needs to change from a societal perspective.
Yeah, it's a lot to grapple with the layers of it, because I think too, what's so complex is like there's so much overlap, right? I just think about like one small thing, childcare. We were just before we hit record talking about it's summer. What are our kids doing this summer? This is the first summer you have your one kid home with you parts of the summer. And that could be because it's a choice that was made or a choice that wasn't made, or like accessibility. And so if we think about
Right.
childcare as like one little factor, it impacts then the time, like the accessibility of childcare, the systematic pieces of that affect then
Right.
the time you have for getting your own needs met. If your kid's home all day,
Right.
which we were
What
just
can
talking
you
about,
do?
it can be really challenging to have your kids
Yeah,
home all day,
for
especially if
sure.
that's not how your time is structured during the school year, right? You
Hmm.
have to figure something new out. And so it is complicated because we can talk about it as two different things. There's the societal factors and the personal factors, but there's so much overlap in how those impact one another that I get why this conversation is going so many different directions on
Yeah.
social media, right?
100%. It's crazy.
It really is. And I'm wondering if you have seen any of the content out there that, because this is something that, like, in my algorithm, in what I'm seeing, I've been seeing so much of, and it's very interesting to me. And I don't really know, like, where I fit into this puzzle, but like talking about, like, what is self care? What isn't self care? What doesn't count? All these things that,
Yeah.
it can be kind of upsetting to me to see kind of the arguments that I'm seeing about just the people's responses to like, well, that's not self-care. Basic going to the doctor and getting screened for things, that's not self-care.
Yeah.
You need to be doing more than that. Or somebody saying right now my self-care is taking a shower, and people being like, well, that's not self-care, you need to be doing more. And for me, I'm like, what exactly are we talking about here? Because those
Right.
things are caring for yourselves, but I also agree that like we have a lot of other needs. So I'm just, have
Right.
you been seeing that? What are your
I have
thoughts?
been. And it's weird because as a mother, I can identify with
Mm-hmm.
both ends of the spectrum, right? Like post COVID, but after already being like 2 years into having my second kid, like I went to a dentist appointment and I was by myself and I was like, this is lovely. Like I'm so happy. And my dentist was laughing at me. He's like, you are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm having such a nice time right now, just getting my teeth cleaned. So and I've been there where like the Target run is self-care. Like sometimes if you're not getting the like how do I even want to put it, because it's I even struggle with using that language, but like I can understand from my own experience how the bare minimum, let's call
Mm-hmm.
it, can really be what gets you through the day when you're in a situation of really 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 deep survival in motherhood. And I've also really just come to learn that it's in each individual's experience and circumstance where I can talk to someone and be like, that isn't self-care for you. But
Mm-hmm.
for someone else who maybe doesn't have childcare, who maybe doesn't have breaks, a dentist appointment can be self-care for them because that's the only, like, why is that wrong? If that particular person can really only manage a 5-minute shower over the course of the day, why can't that be considered self-care if they really situationally cannot do anything else? So when we have this conversation, I would immediately want to be able to speak to each individual person to understand where their mindset is,
Yeah.
to be able to determine like, that's not self-care for you or that is self-care for you, because it really is about perspective and intention for me. When you're taking care of yourself, if there is an intention to take a break and the only break that you can have is a shower, what's wrong with that? If that's all you
Yeah.
can manage for the day, like let that be what can fill you up for the day, and then the next day you can try something else, or you can't. Like it, everybody's in such different situations in their experience of motherhood that it's really hard to be like fit self-care into a box with different levels and be like, if you hit this threshold then you're fine. It's different for
Yeah.
everybody.
It's like I think there can be so much like shaming and unintentional shaming when we
Absolutely.
talk about it in that way of
For
like
sure.
that's not enough. And it's like I mean it might not be enough. Like it
Might
probably
not be.
isn't enough. And I think that's a
Right.
different conversation than that's not self-care. And I think
Yes.
that's what I'm seeing is like
Yes,
that
it's so
conversation
good.
is meshing to like
Mm.
you can't consider that self-care because it's not enough. And it's like, well, I, usually, I don't know. I think for most mothers, I think I can make this statement generalized. There are going to be seasons and periods where it's going to be really hard to get, quote, enough when it comes to
Yes.
caring for
Yes.
ourselves, right? That's why
Yes.
we talk about the mental load. That's why we talk about
Right.
burnout. That's why we have these conversations, right?
Right.
But that doesn't mean you're not engaging in acts of caring for yourself, acts of self-care, right? And I mean, I was just talking to somebody. I really like going to the dentist. I was talking to my mom's friend who's a dental hygienist. I was like, I think they should make it like a spa day. Like they should give you the eye patches, like all these things.
I love that.
Because for some of us who like the dentist, I know that's not everybody, but it's like it can be nice. And that can be whether that's the only thing you're doing by yourself that day without your kids
Right. Right.
or not. Like
Or
you
not.
can have the mindset of, if you're okay with the dentist, you can have the
Right.
mindset of this is a little break for me. This is a little
Right.
retreat. And so whether you're in that kind of survival mode or not, a lot of what makes something feel more than just, oh, the shower is basic hygiene or the shower is like a moment to connect with myself, right? Like
Right.
to
Right.
step away from the noise and just be. There's so much mindset within that. And I think that's an important piece is like, yeah, we can't define something if it's literally just, oh, I just took a shower and I'm clean.
Right.
That might be what you need from the shower. Like, that's fine. I
Right.
do that a lot of times. But that also is an act of caring for yourself, right? Because if you're not getting your basic hygiene needs met, you're not caring for yourself in that way. So it's just a really
Right.
interesting, there's so many layers to it,
I
like you
know. It's
said.
really complicated. Yeah. I think mindset and like intention and awareness is such a huge piece of it,
Hmm.
which is good because that means that if you don't have the time or the opportunity to have breaks or the childcare to go be able to do a 2 hour lunch with your friends, then you can still fill your own cup in whatever capacity that you can through proper intention. The same way that like you can go go work out for an hour and it doesn't necessarily mean anything for you because you're not thinking this is a break. I'm
Hmm.
away from my kids. This is something I'm doing for myself. Like there's like an opportunity to be mindful versus mindless when you're doing things within the self-care realm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if it was somebody on this podcast, a conversation I had, or if it was something I heard somewhere else. I think it was a guest on this podcast when I ask at the end of the episodes, what does self-care look like for you and how do you
Mm-hmm.
advise moms to like make sure that's happening? Somebody said like having something to look forward to
Mm-hmm.
can be a form of self-care. And I think like what you just hit at is very similar to that. It's like
Yeah.
if you are looking forward to this break, or if you are just when you go to the gym, embodying it as like, this
Yeah.
is for me, I'm caring for myself, not just in
Yeah.
the physical needs, but like there's other pieces to it
Exactly.
too.
Yes.
You can get more out of it. And sometimes maybe not,
Absolutely. And sometimes
right?
maybe not. Again, like you do what you can do. But yeah, it can mean so much more, which I think is why when thinking about those folks who don't have the capacity or the situational opportunity to be able to take care of themselves beyond just a shower, it's like that the mindset can help you so much
Hmm.
in those moments, those intentions, because it will fill you so much more to be able to go to the gym and be like, this is for me. I'm so excited to be able to take care of myself in this way. Like, and believe it, obviously. Like, if you're
Hmm.
just telling yourself that stuff and you're not believing it, but you think about like filling your own cup, like, that's what that is doing for you. And it can be like life changing. It really can.
Totally. So I want to get into your ideology of self-connection, how that can act
Mm-hmm.
as self-care, or how that can be even synonymous with self-care in some ways. Because I think it seems like that's almost a lot of what we're talking about here, right? Like it's
Right.
those moments to connect. And you just like tell us what that means,
Yeah.
self-connection, how we do it, what it does for us.
I'm really tired of the term self-care, if I'm going to
Hmm.
be honest with you. It's
Yeah.
like overused. I don't think it's inaccurate. I'm just tired of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I
And
think
when
all
I,
of this conversation, I think, speaks to how you could be tired of it.
yeah,
It's kind of being used in ways that aren't necessarily what you're speaking to, right?
totally. Yeah. And I think when I started thinking about like my own journey and what I needed to feel better in motherhood,
Hmm.
frankly, like as simple as it is, I just wanted to feel better as a mother. I started thinking about what I was doing for myself. And there was so much more when I thought about it as self connection versus self care, because self connection includes the different layers where you can love yourself. But it's funny. I actually am working with the coach now. Her name is Emily. And I don't think she didn't intentionally put this as self connection, but I'm labeling it as such because the way she puts it is you have to love yourself, you have to trust yourself, and you have to know yourself. And I think self connection encompasses all of those things. And when you can get to a place where you like are compassionate with yourself, you are kind to yourself, you actually do love yourself in the same way that you love your children. When you know yourself and your needs and what might throw you off or what might turn you on or anything like that, like understanding and knowing yourself really well. And then on top of that, trusting yourself and the decisions that you make and the way that you move through this world, then you will naturally take care of yourself in a
Hmm.
really consistent way, in lots of different ways. But it's really hard to take those actions. Like self care is an action,
Hmm.
right? But you have to get through all of these other layers of self connection in order to have the action of self care. And I think when I talk about self connection in my world of coaching, it really goes back to like moving past mom guilt because you're allowed to believe that you're a good parent and taking care of yourself in lots of little ways that lead to
Hmm.
lots of bigger ways. Like there's a way to sort of process that out so that you kind of get used to being able to know what your passions are. So many
Yeah.
moms are like, I don't even know what I like anymore. And so self exploration in that way, like it's so much more than just going to work out for 2 hours a week. Oh,
Yeah.
every day. Like it's just there's so much more to us getting to know ourselves again and being able to trust ourselves and be compassionate with ourselves and connecting back to ourselves, like even in really small ways that you're just like, wow, I didn't realize that this sensation I was feeling was me being hungry. I'm actually really hungry. Let me go feed myself. Like the action of self care is actually feeding yourself. But if you don't realize that you're hungry because you're irritable, like people don't even realize that they walk around all day with feelings that they don't really are able to identify. So I love being able to say that self connection encompasses so much more that leads to taking care of yourself. But it's coming from a place that I think it serves us so much better than
Yeah.
this idea of like, you have to just take care of yourself because you'll burn out, which is true. But even though so many moms know it's true, they still don't do it.
Yeah, something that like since the beginning of my exploration into understanding motherhood from this perspective of like the how we exist in the world, how we navigate caring for ourselves and getting our own needs met. Something that I've been really interested in is the connection between self-love and self-care. And I've kind of come to a place of understanding like if you love yourself, if you learn to love yourself, a lot of times there's a lot of learning that goes into that because the world we live in has made it very hard for a lot of us to
Yeah.
feel that love for ourselves. And sometimes that can come from the act of caring for ourselves and, doing that work first to get to a place where we can understand how our relationship with ourselves is and how we can love
Mm-hmm.
ourselves without like, it's like loving our kids. It doesn't mean we have
Yeah.
to be happy with everything all the time. I
Right.
think that can be really tricky. But when we get to that place where we do love ourselves, we are just naturally that kind of underlies all we do. And so we're making decisions that are more like attuned to what we need. And it becomes less of a conversation of this counts as self care, this doesn't count as self care, and more of like, I'm tuned in and I know that my needs are being met. And then I know that they're not being met right now. And that looks like a lot of different things. That looks like being able to, have time to do a hobby. That looks like eating when you're hungry and knowing when your body is
Right.
telling you you're hungry and all these different things. And it's like a totally different conversation then from like going to the doctor isn't self care. That's not enough. It's like, why are we talking about this? Like, yes, it's
Yes.
important that we all are going and getting screened for the things we need to be screened for and taking care of
Hmm.
our bodies. Like, that is important. And yes, it's also not meeting all our needs. That's like meeting
Right.
just a little bit of what our needs are. And so I love that way of thinking of it as self-connection because and self-love as a piece of that
Absolutely.
self-connection. And then you
Absolutely.
can know too, like if you're connected and you're tuned in, it's like, I need to just like binge watch reality TV tonight because I need
Yeah.
to check out and I don't want to connect right now. But I know
Right.
that that's a need I have is to just check
Yes.
out because everything's been too much. And it just gives, yeah, there's so many ways we can look at different things in our life as caring for ourselves when we know what it is that we need.
Yeah. I love the way you say being tuned in. That feels really good. That feels like, yeah, that's a big piece of it. Like how many moms out there are feeling tuned in or not,
And there
right?
really is, there's so much noise. Like, there's so much calling for our attention. There's so much else that we're supposed to be tuned into that we need to be tuned into, right? Like our kids, like their schedules, all the things. Like, there's
Yeah.
a lot. So, there's so much compassion that we need to have for ourselves when we are
Ah,
not
yes.
tuned in, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think self-compassion is something that everybody struggles with. And it's not something that has a finish line. It's just a journey that
Hmm.
you're just going to be on for the rest of your life. And I think that was really helpful for me to understand too. It's like I, as a recovering perfectionist, right? Like there's not a goal. Like you're not going to get to the finish line where you're like, ah, I'm not hard on myself anymore. We're done with this. Now on to the next. Like it's just going to be something that you just continue to work on. And that's okay. You keep leveling up, but you never finish.
Because it's
You
always
never finish.
changing too. Like the
Mm-hmm.
external factors are always changing, and then we're always changing, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what we need is always changing what we have capacity for at different seasons, right? Like as our kids get older and more independent, there's going to be more time, more space, more capacity, most likely to bring in more ways to connect with yourself.
For sure. In different ways,
Hmm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Our interests are allowed to change, like
Yeah,
all of it.
absolutely. Well, the same way that you're like, today, all I can manage is a 5 minute shower, and tomorrow I'll be able to go on a hike for 2 hours. Like,
Yeah. Like literally in the day to day too.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But being able to tune into yourself like that, I think, is such a good place to be and to start,
Yeah.
so good.
What advice do you have for moms who either feel like they just don't have the time and capacity for self-care? Like, where do we start with that? And then even for moms too who maybe are at a point where they're like, okay, I want to start connecting more with myself and being able to do this self-care thing from a more like holistic perspective.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about before we hit record was that idea like moms go all or nothing thinking.
Hmm.
And so, especially with social media being like a doctor's appointment isn't self care, mom's probably out there thinking, like, well, I can't do anything. I can't go and shopping, or I can't go to this pottery class every week. Like, I'm not able to do those things. So clearly, I just can't take care of myself. I can't do anything right now. And so, I think it's so important to understand the power that small acts of intention can have in your journey of self connection and self care, because it's hard to jump. Like, what is that? You can't eat an elephant in one bite. Like, you have to start small, and that's okay. And that makes it easier because you're not going to be like, oh, I'm just going to start like working out 3 times a week. Like, that's hard. But maybe I can just make sure that I just have intentional time in the shower where I lock the door and nobody's going to come and bother me, and I'll sit there and actually be like, this is me time. I'm going to put lotion on. I'm going to put music on, and I'm going to have 10 minutes to myself every single day. That's a little bit easier for a lot of people to manage. But I love, and this has worked so well for me, just starting by asking yourself, what do I want to do?
Hmm.
Constantly, all day, because it doesn't require any effort. You just have to remember to ask yourself, like, what do I want to do? And it sort of signals your brain to find the answer. And for me, it took a long time. Like, I would get nothing. I was so deep in survival mode that I would ask myself that question, and it would be, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what I want to do. But asking yourself that question is such an easy way to start that process of connecting to yourself, being like, oh, I want to have a snack. Oh, I want to go outside. Oh, I want to listen to music. And so there's a switch that goes off in your brain because you're signaling to yourself that you actually do have power and you can choose to do something for yourself. And it's also sort of opening that door of like, oh, what do I want to do?
Hmm.
Wait, what do I want to do right now? Whereas you haven't probably asked yourself that question in ages because you're constantly thinking about what your kids want to do, or what do I need to do right now versus what I want to do. And that those two changes in words make such a big difference to your brain. So what do I want to do right now? What do I want? Do I want to wash the dishes? No, I don't want to wash the dishes. Or yes, I totally want to wash the dishes right now. And there's an energetic shift that can start to happen when you consistently ask yourself that question. And it's so easy. It's such a good place to start. But the other thing, again, just going back to intention, like intention is everything. And you have to believe it. If you don't believe it,
Yeah.
it's not going to work. But if you actually sit there and you can go outside for 5 minutes and you can just be like, oh, it feels so good. I'm so glad I'm outside. I'm so glad it's quiet. I'm so glad the sun is shining, right? Like, I'm just here for a minute. That can really, really, really make all of the difference because it's an emotional experience when you're spent, right? Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, this idea of
Yeah.
like the mental load and not having any patience and being emotionally drained, like it's happening in here. Like, I know that there are physical manifestations of it for sure. But when you think about self care, it's an internal process. You're filling your own cup
Hmm.
inside. And so that intention has so much power because you're still doing the internal work for yourself. And I think those would be the two biggest offerings I could give in terms of actionable ways to start your own self connection journey in a really simple way would be focus on intention and just ask yourself what you want to do. What do I want to do today? It's so
Yeah. And
simple.
it really is. And you can see too how like it spirals then into really good habits and patterns and ways of being intentional, ways of existing. Because when you are asking yourself what you want, you're showing yourself love and care. And when you're responding to those wants, you're showing yourself
Yeah,
love and care, and it becomes easier then to care about what you want, right? Like
for
it
sure.
is a
It's like
really beautiful cycle.
snowballs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's yeah, it's start, right? Like write it on a post-it note, start asking yourself those things, start being intentional when you are doing those things, knowing that like you may have to work hard at that intention at first. You may have to
For sure.
really, be like very intentional. Like I'm gonna like
Yeah.
not pick up my phone. I'm going to enjoy this. This is what I want out of this, and this is what I'm going to aim for. But as you do that, it's going to become easier and less, it's going to be less work to like get to the bottom of what you want and to
Right.
give yourself that, because it just becomes like the natural underlying way of existing in your life.
Yeah. 100%.
So
So
this
good.
is such a good conversation. So beautiful. Just I'm so happy that we connected about doing this and having this conversation, because I
Me
do think
too.
it's a really like great thing for anyone who's interested in learning to connect with themselves and care for themselves more, to like just hear all these thoughts and take the pieces of it that make sense to you, right? It's like
Yeah.
there might be something that doesn't resonate, and that's fine. But there
Yeah.
might be things we've talked about a lot, right? There might be
We
things that really
have.
do resonate, and take it all in.
Take it. Take it. Use it.
Amazing. Where can listeners find you? How can they connect with you? You just have like this calming presence and energy. So
Oh,
where can they
thanks.
get more of
I
that?
do love, I do. I love chatting with you, Emily. I'm so glad to be back. My home is on Instagram. I love Instagram. My handle is at that mom life underscore coaching. And I really encourage people to also just message me to chat. If they have questions or if they're going through something, or if you just want to say hi, like we can create a connection, going in the same theme of connections without any pressure or any expectation beyond just saying hello and I'm here to help and what do you need?
I love that. You're doing amazing work. And I'm so grateful to have connections with other women who are supporting moms in this really important way. I think it's so needed in this world. And it's beautiful that we're here showing up and
Yes,
doing that.
yes. You're doing amazing work too, Emily.
Oh,
Don't discount that.
thank you. I appreciate it.
It's true.
Thank you so much for everybody who has tuned into this episode. I hope, again, that there's little pieces of this that you can take and just like think about in your own life. I would love it if you would share this episode with another mom in your life. I'm sure that if you got something out of it, that they will also get something out of that. And if you could head to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review, that is another thing that would just be incredible and help other moms find the show, know if it is a good fit for them to listen to. These conversations are really important. It's really important that we are understanding ourselves as these whole people in our roles as mothers and knowing how we connect with the rest of the world. And like, there's so much to our experiences. So I want other moms in on the conversation, right? So both of those things would be great. Thank you so much for being here. You are worthy, mama.